So in our last episode of Chad, according to Chad, we left off in the year 2013 with Chad gaining popularity at that time on a website called Avaal, another voice of warning. If you haven't listened to parts 1 through 4, you might want to go back and listen to them now. Otherwise, you might get pretty lost. So last time we talked about Chad's big idea. The voice's idea.
The voice.
Same thing. Chad or the voice, whatever, same thing. So the idea goes back to 2004. The voice supports Chad quitting his job and being his own boss, running his own book company and becoming a big shot author. Chad's dream job. All a complete failure. By 2008, the Daybells owed over $300,000. A little over $200,000 of that debt was to about 60 creditors, mostly tied to Spring Creek Book Company. Tammy and Chad declared bankruptcy, and Tammy got a job in August of 2008. Chad, he went and found another job as a gravedigger 5 months later, in late January of 2009. Why did it take him so long? Why didn't he get out there and find a job in 2007 when things started to look bad? If you've been watching this series, you already know the answer. The voice doesn't want Chad to work full-time.
The voice.
Because Chad is just that special. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to Left Undone, Incomplete Investigations. I'm Catherine. Okay, so for all of you who have been here before, welcome back. For those of you who are new, my name is Catherine. I'm a mom of 4 grown children and a yaya of 2 little ones. That's Greek for grandma. A hospice nurse, a registered nurse. And I am, the yaya is because I'm Greek. My parents were both Greek. My grandparents are all Greek. My dad was born and raised in Greece. So over 4 years ago, I started this YouTube channel, Left Undone, Incomplete Investigations. It was one of the first channels that covered the story of the missing children from Idaho, 7-year-old JJ Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. If you really want a deep dive, I also have a podcast that goes into a lot of detail, really deep dive. It's called Afterglow, Unveiling the Idaho Cult, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And if you ever feel like you need a break from true crime, please check out my Greek travel channel. It's called Beyond the Empty Nest. I have beautiful videos of Greece over there, perfect to click on if you're planning a trip or just want to have a little desktop vacation. You can enjoy my vlog. I appreciate it if you do. Thank you so much. Okay, so where were we with Chad Daybell? Oh yes, Spanish Fork Cemetery. Did I mention that Chad beat out 150 other candidates and aced several tense interviews to land the Spanish Fork Cemetery gig? He did. Who knew the application process for grave digging was so competitive and intense? 150. So Tammy and Chad, they survived the bankruptcy. And Chad has a job with an increased salary and great insurance. I'm sure there were some people who hoped Chad had finally given up on the idea that his strange little books and his dream of being a successful publisher could not support a family. But no, Chad won't give up. Another personality trait of Chad, a total pig-headed unwillingness to look the facts in the face. One day in the Spanish Fork Cemetery, Chad realized he must get back to writing. Chad gives credit to a coworker who just won't let him give up his dream. This coworker was like, "No, Chad, you got to be a writer and a publisher. That's your dream. Go for it, buddy." So I'm not going to mention her name because she's probably already suffered enough just working with Chad, just literally just knowing Chad. But thanks to this coworker's encouragement, Chad went right back to writing, which that's all he likes to do anyway. And he finished the Standing in Holy Places series over the next 2 years. That's the series where we got to know the character named Tad. Yes, Tad. Rhymes with Chad. Coincidence? And Double D Dog Dalton is back in this book as well. And Emma, female version of Chad, and Mark, yet another version of Chad. It's not just that he writes himself as characters into his book. He's like all the characters. Even Emma is basically a female version of Chad himself. Chad claims the characters are supposed to be a blended version of his 5 children, but really, in one way or another, they're all him, all Chad. Okay, back to Chad and Avaal, the Avaal website. Here's a screenshot of the site. It says Chad joined it in 2011, June 2011. In 2011, the Daybells were still in Springville, Utah, but it was about a year and a half into his Spanish Fork Cemetery gig. Based on past performances, we can safely assume Chad was already looking for a way out of that job. A fair guesstimate would be about 2013 as a rough date, where Chad really begins to use Avaal as a place to find the money, power, and sex. You know, money, power, and sex. That's what life has denied him so far. And the money, power, and sex, the Idaho prosecutors claim, motivated the murders of JJ, Tylee, and Tammy and Charles, and maybe 1 or 2 others. So that's why we're talking about Avaal. Chad's behavior on Avaal, it left a digital trace. If you have followed the series up to this point, you know there were plenty of indications over the years that Chad was a weird, quirky guy. A guy who from a very early age wanted people to think he was spiritually advanced, special, and a successful author. Those who knew him best saw him as self-centered, morbid, and a guy who didn't feel all the rules actually applied to him. But up until 2013, it's doubtful that anyone who met Chad Daybell in person or online thought of him as a predator or thought he could ever have been involved in any kind of story like this. So, did something happen to Chad? Or was Chad always a wolf in sheep's clothing? You know, the sheep's clothing being his nice guy disguise. I'm just this frumpy little nice boy, nice guy. For anyone meeting Chad Daybell in 2013, what did they see? Outwardly, particularly, at age 45, Chad looked like any other harmless Mormon dad. He looked the part. He dressed the part. He grew up in the LDS community. He went to an LDS university. He was an LDS missionary. He married an LDS woman who in every way created a good Mormon backdrop for him, a well-ordered, clean home with 5 great kids. Interviews with people who knew Chad in his last year in Springville, which was 2014, also in his Rexburg years, 2015 on, suggest he was the sort of person who looked very conservative on the outside. But once you spoke with him for a while, you realized there was something odd about him. For instance, there's an interview online with a woman called Girl on Fire who knew Chad in his Rexburg years, and she said he was the kind of person who would start by telling a story about something someone else was doing, but he was really talking about himself. For example, Chad might say, I was talking to some folks over in Layton who said they'd just spent $15K on some really nice tents, getting prepared for whatever might come. Now, if Chad got a positive response, then he'd share a few more things, always getting a sense with every interaction how open the other person was to his ideas. The ideas he was discussing on a private little group on Avaal. Pay $5 a month and you can talk to Chad. So on Avaal, it's manipulation 101, sales techniques, also grooming techniques. Push a little, learn a little, confide, isolate, up the ante, make the sale. This is most likely how his friendship began with an attractive young housewife named Julie Rowe. And yes, we will have to talk a little bit about Julie Rowe. On the web forum Avaal, Julie Rowe has been sharing visions and prophecies that she claimed to have received after a near-death experience. Just an aside here, since Chad's arrest, there's been some he said, she said about who suggested Julie should write a book. Chad says Julie contacted him, and she said it was the other way around. He contacted her. Either way, however it went down, Chad liked what he read. In early 2014, Chad Daybell decided Julie was someone he wanted to get to know better. Hopefully, we've established in this series, Chad According to Chad, that at this point in his life, Chad was definitely aware of the money-making potential of near-death experience books and ebooks. And remember, his own publishing company had gone bankrupt in 2008. That was a big ego hit. So at age 46, with so much of Chad's ego being invested in his image, fantasy image, of being an author and a publisher, Chad wasn't exactly successful. Meanwhile, Cedar Fort Publishing, the publishing company he quit in 2004 in a huff, was extremely successful. It had been making a fortune off Visions of Glory since 2012. So Chad had a big chip on his shoulder and something to prove. Exactly at the time that he finds Julie Rowe on Avaal website, with her beautiful smile, long brown hair, and compelling visions of apocalyptic despair and destruction. Julie probably looked to Chad like an NDE success waiting to happen. Talk about a vision. So actually, early on, Chad told Julie, in a full waking vision, he'd seen her face and heard her voice in the year 2006, long before he ever heard her name. And then, in classic Chad style, he tells her that they were married in a past life. So if you learned anything about Chad, you know that's his pickup line. He has a history of telling women they've been married in a past life. So later on, when he hits on them, he can say it's not wrong or bad if they have sex because they're still married spiritually. By the way, Julie says that Chad did hit on her quite aggressively, but she rejected him. 2014 is thought to be about the time when some of these doomsday subgroups, particularly those talking about Rexburg as the New Jerusalem, were using weird terms like spiritual wifery and the spiritual sharing of spouses. This idea that in past lives, people were married to each other. So let's get it on like we used to in the 17th century. And pretty soon, Chad's talking about these ideas too, behind closed doors, claiming that his spirit tear allows him to see who people were in their past lives and who's dark and light and who can sleep with whom. Okay, more rabbit holes, of course, right? But here is why we're talking about Chad's relationship with Julie Rowe. In Living on the Edge of Heaven, Chad, as an experienced editor and publisher, brags that he knows how to interrogate any potential NDE authors to make sure that they're not frauds. And being Chad, of course, he also brags that he was never wrong because of the, can you guess? You know Chad by now, right?
The voice, the voice, the voice,
Yeah.
the voice.
The voice again. It's strange, though, why the voice didn't let Chad know that Julie Rowe had dissociative identity disorder. Now, this is not to be disrespectful about mental illness, but Julie was a person with a serious mental illness. And Julie's been very forthcoming about her mental health issues herself. And Chad didn't see that, or did he, and not care? That's what makes the Julie Rowe part pretty significant in this story of Chad. Is Chad someone who takes advantage of mentally ill women, brainwashes them, manipulates them? Well, Julie Rowe was mentally ill, and Chad absolutely used her. Some will say they used each other, and that's probably true too. But Chad absolutely was the one who got Julie Rowe's visionary career started. He used Julie Rowe to make money and further his career. In Chad's upcoming trial, we've heard that John Pryor is hoping to portray Chad convincingly as a victim of Lori Vallow Daybell. The story of Julie Rowe might be a bit of a problem for him. A case can be made by the prosecution that Chad is a predator of the wounded, vulnerable women. There's Julie. There's two Melanies. There's Dilemma. All these women had very difficult, disruptive lives. And I mean, look at Lori. How many times have we heard the word crazy used to describe Lori? Maybe she didn't meet the legal definition of crazy, but Lori was sent to a psychiatric hospital before her own trial. And certainly we've heard her husband, Charles Vallow, trying to get her psychiatric help. And from the texts and emails we've seen so far, those women in Chad's little harem, the ones he described as the Arizona girls, there was something very off about all of them. Emotionally healthy people don't believe that they are gods and goddesses, or that they can control the elements, or teleport, or have rejuvenating uteruses. Julie Rowe is important, at least for assessing Chad's attitude towards people, particularly women with mental illness. Julie Rowe is the very first public example of how far Chad Daybell was willing to use someone who was mentally ill if it furthered his own agenda. Money, power, sex. For those of you who know a little bit about Julie Rowe, you'll know that she was a very strong woman, hardly a shrinking violet. But no matter how you feel about Julie Rowe, Chad coming into Julie's life was a tragedy in itself. It set off a whole train wreck of events that brought a lot of pain into her life and into a lot of other people's lives too. Friendships, marriages, families were disrupted and damaged. The ripple effects and the impact on people's trust and faith and beliefs have been huge. Just because someone has a strong personality doesn't mean that they can't be vulnerable to a manipulative cult leader. Chad latched onto Julie and he wouldn't let go. Because in 2014, he wanted that NDE goose that laid the golden egg. The golden NDE eggs. Chad wanted to find his own version of a moneymaker like Visions of Glory, and to have it be a bestseller for Spring Creek Book Company. A book that could make a lot of money with very little work required from Chad. Even though Julie Rowe was living in Arizona and Chad was in Utah, they collaborated over the phone so well. They finished her first book and got it published in 5 months. So if you ever wondered about what his wife Tammy thought of Chad being on his cell phone as go-to guru for women, Chad set up a situation in 2014 where he could be on the phone with another woman at any hour. This first situation with Julie Rowe led Tammy to believe it was okay because it was business and furthering everyone's higher mission, or whatever crap he was telling her. In Chad's texts that we've seen so far, he was sneaky. He wasn't on his phone with women on Sunday. The Sabbath was for church and family. So Chad was a TBM on Sundays, true blue Mormon, and talked to the ladies Monday through Saturday. But from 2014 on, Chad was 100% free to be on the phone with women all day long, without suspicion. Probably prior to 2019, no one, not even Tammy, was questioning this. So when Tammy saw Julie Rowe's book come out in mid-May of 2014, the first one was called A Greater Tomorrow. She could see that, yes, Chad was true to his word. He was on the phone helping a woman write her book. Looked fine on the surface. And Julie's first book, it sold well. So there were financial rewards. Chad was back on the phone with Julie a lot in 2014. They met in person in July, so he writes, that July, only 2 months after her book came out, Julie Rowe filled the Logan, Utah Tabernacle with hundreds of people for a talk. So the two of them, Chad and Julie, cranked out a second book by that November of 2014. 2 books in 11 months. And her popularity, it continued to grow in Utah and particularly in Rexburg. 2014. One of the questions a lot of people have had about this case is why Chad suddenly got it into his head after 45 years of crazy dedicated living in Springville, Utah, to move to Rexburg in 2014. It was sudden. Chad got the idea in August of 2014 to move to Idaho, and by March of 2015, he and Tammy were in Rexburg shopping for houses. That's only 7 months. And it happened right between the publishing of Julie Rowe's 2 2014 books. Is there a connection there? Maybe, but what? Now, if you're one of those people who thinks Chad genuinely believed his own predictions, then this move to Idaho could be proof to you that Chad really did 100% believe that a series of natural disasters and famines and plagues were going to wipe out America very soon. And Rexburg was going to be the new Jerusalem. So he was moving there to keep his family safe. But if you believe that Chad was a fraud and full of crapola, there must have been something else he wanted in Rexburg. But what was it? Julie's popularity in Rexburg and Chad becoming a bit of a celebrity on Avaal probably both hold at least a part of that answer, especially Rexburg. Avaal's roots run deep in Idaho. Their current mailing address is actually Rigby, Idaho, just a few minutes south of Rexburg, an area that is 95% LDS. Lots of Avaal members in Idaho. Chad found through Avaal a new kind of acceptance in Rexburg, and book sales were high in Rexburg. Now, as I've mentioned before, I am not LDS, but generalizing from what I've read, it looks like Eastern Idaho Mormons might be some of the most religiously and politically conservative Mormons in the United States, especially as one gets closer to Rexburg. And if you could please comment below if I don't have that quite right. I want to be careful about generalizing, and of course, there's always exceptions. So from what I understand, there were a lot of people in Rexburg who were open to Julie Rowe's ideas and Chad's, especially about Rexburg being the location of the new Jerusalem. Also in 2014, Julie's popularity in Idaho coincided with Chad's parents paying for a big extended family reunion vacation in Island Park, Idaho. Island Park is located about 30 minutes from Yellowstone Park's west entrance. The state of Idaho has some really, really gorgeous recreational places, and those places are perfect to visit in the summertime and in the wintertime too, if you enjoy winter sports. So why did the Utah-based Daybell clan vacation in Idaho? Chad had a brother in Rexburg who'd done quite well for himself there. His brother had a lovely, really big home and lots of other things that an honest, successful man with a good reputation gets in life. He was not particularly close with his younger brother. They were not estranged, just didn't have much in common. You know, one of those sometimes a friendly, healthy distance is good for family relationships situation, it kind of seems. The closer family ties were in Utah for both Chad and for Tammy. But Chad wanted something else. Chad writes that he had a wonderful time in Idaho, that it was a much needed break from everyday life. Because we all know that of all people, Chad needs a break because, you know, he works so hard. Poor Chad. According to Chad, while he is pumping gas at St. Anthony's, Idaho, the voice tells him,
You'll live here soon, Chad.
I mentioned this very briefly in episode 2, how the story of Chad's is kind of similar to one of the more ridiculous scenes in the best-selling near-death experience book, Visions of Glory. The main character, Spencer, has a dream where he meets Jesus Christ, in a parking lot. Here's the quote. This is spoken by the main character in that book. I turned around to see who had spoken my name. I was astonished to see Jesus Christ standing in the parking lot where the sidewalk begins. Great writing, right? Doesn't in the parking lot where the sidewalk begins sound like somebody giving directions to an Uber Eats driver? I mean, for real. Yes, I am standing in the parking lot at Arco where the sidewalk begins at the corner right there. So he thanked Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. And told that the righteous desire of his heart would be granted. Wing! Like Cinderella. Your wish is granted. In Chad's writing, we already know the voice is also always willing to grant Chad the righteous desire of his heart. Of course, the voice. And as we've seen, quite a few unrighteous ones too. And Chad also almost always surprised about the great things the voice says are going to happen to him. All right, I got a question for everybody. With Chad and this guy from Visions of Glory, they are supposed to be constantly having all of these supernatural visions and experiences, right? Why do they always say how astonished and surprised they are? Because this is something that's going on the daily, right, with them? But they're like, oh, I'm so astonished. There's another one. Whoa. Wouldn't you think after weeks and months and years of being an advanced spiritual being, you'd kind of get used to it? Apparently not. Anyway, let's set the stage again. We have Chad in Idaho standing out on the asphalt, pumping gas into his minivan. Did Chad see Rexburg as a place not only full of people who would buy his books, but where the Idaho vacation experience would be had year round? So Chad is surprised that the voice told him he would live in Rexburg soon. But by now we know that the voice is a ruse. There is no voice. Come on, there's no voice. It's just Chad. The voice is what Chad wants when Chad wants it. And in Visions of Glory, Spencer is always surprised. So if you're cynical like I am, because I am, Chad thinks he has to say it too. But this time, the voice is screwing over a lot more people than just Tammy. Chad's family is happy in Springville. The Daybell kids are settled. 2 of them are still in high school. I think the other 2 were in college, and maybe 1 was on a mission. Tammy has a full-time job at their old high school, Springville High. Her mother, her father, her siblings, and all sorts of extended family who care about her are in Springville. No one wanted to move if they didn't have to. But, as usual, Chad is restless. He's been quitting jobs again. Remember the job at Spanish Fork Cemetery that was so great? You know, the one with the higher salary and the great insurance? He quit that in 2013. Then in 2014, he was back at the Springville Cemetery briefly, and then he quit again to write. What will it take for Chad to stay with a job that supports his family? As far as their last year in Springville, Tammy's brother hired him as a part-time helper with his window business, just 3 days a week, so Chad could write. Does that say something about how Tammy's family perceived the Daybell's financial situation? What kind of conversations were going on behind the scenes about Chad and his refusal to stick to a job that would support his family? In their last year in Springville, friends said that Tammy was wearing old clothes and shoes that were worn out and falling apart. It must have been crazy making for her. They still had teenagers at home to feed and to clothe. But Chad had shifted his hopes to Avaal and his fan base there, his followers, his book signing tours, where he felt like he had prestige. Setting up a folding table at LDS bookstores, conferences. There's one photo of him in his autobiography that actually looks like he's at Costco. And can you imagine the Daybell bundle? 60 rolls of toilet paper and Chad's latest trilogy. On sale now at Costco. Seriously, I don't know if it was really a Costco. It might have been an LDS food storage store or something like that. My point is, they were not fancy venues. He was not a fancy writer. It was all ego. Just a fantasy that he was big, important, and destined for greatness. He's a legend in his own mind. And what did Chad see through in 2014, just 2 months after Julie Rowe published her near-death experience? Julie Rowe filled the Logan, Utah Tabernacle with hundreds of people for a talk. This is where you see Chad's wheels start turning. Julie Rowe will go on to make a lot of money from personal appearances. Some have estimated that she has grossed $30,000 just from a single talk. At this point, you see Chad shift focus. In his autobiography, he signs off in May of 2017 saying nothing about his career as a speaker. But in July 2017, he is a guest speaker at Prepper Camp in Morgan, Utah, an event hosted by a group that will become Preparing a People. An event that a new friend of his, another questionable visionary named David Warwick, has been a speaker at before, where he meets Melanie Gibb, who will introduce him to Lori Vallow the very next year. Melanie Gibb and her boyfriend, David Warwick, will be witnesses at Chad's trial. They were in Rexburg the week that J.J. Vallow was murdered, perhaps even the night he was murdered. Those of you who wonder why we end each episode with the seagulls, for the Mormons of Utah, they represent miracles and protection. And as always, we'll say, rest in peace, JJ, Tylee, Tammy, and Charles. Please like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, check out my other channels if you like, and I will see you next time. Stay safe, stay well, and I will see you soon. I'm Kathy Brooks. Bye-bye.